Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at Einstein Never Used Flashcards, which, as you might guess, challenges some pretty common ideas about how to raise smart and happy kids.
Yeah, it's a book a lot of parents could probably benefit from reading these days.
For sure. I mean, it feels like everywhere you turn, the pressure is on to get kids learning, like, academics as early as possible.
Right. And this book kind of throws that whole early academics thing out the window and says, hey, what about play?
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, the author, Kathy Hirsh-Pasek, she doesn't just say play is good. She
Yeah.
backs it all up with like tons of research about how kids' brains actually work.
Yeah, she's not just saying, trust me. It's all, based on science.
So I guess like the first thing the book kind of does is paint this picture of like the modern parent
Usually.
stressed out, running around trying to like cram in all these, learning opportunities.
Yes. I mean, think about it. How many kids do you know who have, like, every afternoon booked up with some kind of class or activity?
Oh gosh, so many. And I'm totally guilty of this too. But here's the stat that really like jumped out at me from the book. By 1997, playtime for kids had been cut down to just 25%.
It's kind of sad when you think about it. And the book argues that this whole push for early academics, it's not just about kids missing out on playtime. It could actually be harmful to their development.
Yeah, like are we creating all these like mini anxious adults before they've even had a chance to just be kids?
That's the question, isn't it? And the book talks about rising rates of anxiety and depression in kids, and you have to wonder, like, is all this pressure contributing to that?
It makes you think for sure. So, okay, what's the alternative? The book talks about these 3 R's: reflect, resist, recenter. Like, what's that all about?
That's where the book, starts getting really practical.
Okay, so reflect. What's that about?
Well, I think it's about, parents really taking a step back and being honest with themselves.
Yeah.
Are we pushing our own anxieties onto our kids? Are we actually focused on what's best for them? Or are we just caught up in, what everyone else is doing?
Like keeping up with the Joneses, but like Kid Achievement Edition.
Exactly. It's like, hold on, am I doing this because it's actually good for my child or because I think I should be doing it?
Right. That's such a good point. And then what about resist?
I think resist is about, having the courage to say no to all that pressure, like pushing back against the idea that we have to, overschedule our kids.
Right. Like
Yeah.
sometimes saying no is actually saying yes to something that's more important.
Exactly. Saying yes to playtime, to free time, to letting kids just be kids, even when it feels like everyone else is signing their kids up for, Mandarin lessons at age 3.
And that's so tough though, right? Because you don't want your kid to fall behind.
It's hard. But then you read a book like this, and you start to think, wait, what are they falling behind exactly?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. And then what's the last one? Recenter. What does that mean?
Well, if resist is about pushing back against all that pressure, I think recenter is about, figuring out what to put in its place.
Okay.
And the book says what should be at the center of childhood is dot play.
Not just like scheduled play dates though, right?
Yeah, like real play,
Mhm.
unstructured, child-led, where kids can explore and experiment and just discover things on their own.
It's funny. This is making me think about my own childhood. I used to spend hours like building forts and putting on plays, just like making up stories. And honestly, I think those experiences were way more valuable than any like flashcards or workbooks I ever had.
I think a lot of people would say the same thing. And the book really challenges this myth that parents are like solely responsible for, molding their child's brain.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's more like kids are naturally wired to learn. They come, pre-programmed with curiosity and a drive to explore. Like that's just how they're built.
So it's not like we have to be, brain surgeons or master teachers to raise intelligent kids.
Exactly. And there's this really cool study the book talks about that really shows this. Scientists took these 2 groups of rats. One group was raised in like these super enriched environments with all these toys and mazes. And the other group, they were just in plain cages with, just the basics.
Okay, and I'm guessing the enriched rats had like huge brains and the plain cage rats were, left in the dust.
Well, it's actually not that simple. The enriched rats, they did have slightly bigger brains, but both groups, they developed all the essential brain structures and functions.
Really?
Yeah. And what that suggests is that even just ordinary experiences
Hmm.
are enough to, wire a healthy brain. It's not like you have to go crazy with, flashcards and educational apps 24/7.
Oh, that's kind of a relief to hear, actually. So it sounds like it's more about Giving kids a loving environment where they feel safe to explore, and just letting their natural curiosity lead the way. But what does that actually look like day to day? I mean, are we talking about just letting them run wild?
No, not exactly. It's more about recognizing all the learning opportunities that are already present in those like everyday moments. Talking to your child, singing songs, playing peekaboo, all that stuff. It's actually building crucial brain connections.
You know what? This is making me feel a lot less guilty about those days when, like, I let my kids watch a little extra TV so I can catch up on laundry. It's not like every second has to be this, like, meticulously planned learning experience.
I think that's a really important point. We don't have to be perfect.
Right.
And this is where I think the book's emphasis on play really comes into play. It's not just about having fun. It's about laying the groundwork for all kinds of learning, like from math and language to social skills and emotional intelligence.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. But before we get into all that, I have a question that's been bugging me. My nephew, he learned to count to 10 when he was like 2 years old, but he clearly didn't understand what the numbers meant? So was he actually learning math or was it just rote memorization?
That's such a good question. And it perfectly illustrates what the book calls clever Hans learning.
Clever Hans? Who's that?
Oh, well, clever Hans, he was this horse back in the early 1900s. And he became super famous because he could seemingly do math.
Wait, a horse doing math?
Yeah. People would ask him questions like, what's 2 plus 2? And he'd tap his hoof 4 times. And everyone thought he was this, genius horse.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. But I have a feeling there's a twist to this story, right?
I got it. It turned out clever Hans wasn't actually doing math at all. He was picking up on these like subtle unconscious cues from his owner.
Ah, so he was reading his owner's body language, not actually doing calculations in his head.
Exactly. And what this shows is that there's a big difference between, superficial learning and actually understanding something. Just because a kid can, recite numbers or letters doesn't mean they get the concepts behind them.
Okay, that makes sense. So, like, how do we make sure kids are actually understanding those early math concepts, not just like parroting what they hear? Does the book say we should, ditch flashcards altogether?
I don't think it's about getting rid of all tools completely,
Okay.
but it's about understanding that real learning, it happens when kids can actually, engage with those concepts, not just passively take them in. And this is where play comes in.
So instead of drilling flashcards, we should be letting kids like build towers with blocks or sort toys by color.
That's a great example. When a kid builds a tower, they're learning about balance, spatial reasoning, maybe even, basic physics, but in a fun way.
Right, like without even realizing they're doing math.
Exactly. That's the beauty of play. And it's not just math either. Play is huge for developing language skills too.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that. My niece is about to turn 1, and I'm already thinking about, all the things I can do to help her language development. Should I be focusing on, like, flashcards with pictures and words, or is there a more play-based approach?
Well, have you ever heard of baby sign language?
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine used it with her baby, and it was amazing to see how much they could communicate before they could even, talk.
And the book actually talks about how baby signs can really boost language development because it gives babies a way to, express themselves more clearly.
Right, which is probably a lot less frustrating for everyone involved.
Totally. But then around 18 months or so, it's like, boom, their vocabulary just explodes.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy how fast it happens.
The book calls it the vocabulary explosion. And around this age, kids start picking up new words like crazy. Sometimes like 9 new words a day.
Wow. 9 new words a day. No wonder they start talking our ears off. But those early sentences, they're not exactly grammatically perfect, right?
No, but they're still so important for their language development. Those simple 2-word phrases like want juice or go park, they're actually building blocks for more complex grammar later on.
Oh, that's fascinating. And this is making me think about how much I loved reading to my kids when they were little. I always thought it was just this nice bonding experience, but is there like an actual scientific link between reading aloud and language development?
There is. The book really emphasizes that reading aloud is one of the most powerful things parents can do to help their kids develop language and literacy skills. And it's not just about reading the words, it's about making it interactive.
So instead of just reading the story straight through, we should be asking questions and like
Yeah.
pointing things out in the pictures, making it a conversation.
Exactly. The book calls this dialogic reading, and it's all about engaging kids with the story and helping them build those really important comprehension skills. And you can do it with any book, even the ones you've read 100 times.
Oh, that's good to know because I think my kids had Goodnight Moon memorized by the time they were 2. You know, hearing all this about language development is really making me realize that play, it's not just about having fun. It's actually laying the groundwork for all these essential academic skills.
That's a key point. And it's not just academics either. Play is also crucial for developing social and emotional intelligence, which, in today's world, that's huge.
Absolutely. Because, let's be real, being book smart isn't enough to, succeed in life. You need to know how to navigate relationships, manage your emotions, understand other people's perspectives, all that stuff.
And that's where I think the book's message about redefining intelligence comes in. It's not all about IQ, it's about EQ, emotional intelligence, and how that can be just as important, maybe even more important for success in life.
Okay, so we're talking about things like empathy, self-awareness, the ability to build healthy relationships. But how do we teach that stuff? Like, are there EQ flashcards?
Well, there are assessments for emotional intelligence, but they're not as straightforward as like a traditional IQ test. It's more about observing your child's behavior, how they interact with others, how they handle challenges, how they express their emotions, all of that.
So it's less about formal testing and more about paying attention in those everyday moments.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to foster EQ is to model those behaviors ourselves. Kids are always watching us. So if we want them to be empathetic, we need to show empathy in our own lives. If we want them to manage their emotions effectively, we need to show them how we do it.
Oh, that's such a good point. Sometimes it's easy to forget that we're constantly teaching our kids, even when we're not actively trying to.
That's so true. And another thing is to talk about emotions openly with our kids. Help them build a vocabulary for their feelings and encourage them to express themselves in healthy ways.
This is all so helpful, and it's making me realize that raising emotionally intelligent kids, it's about so much more than just teaching them to be nice or follow the rules. It's about helping them understand themselves and others and, figure out all the complicated parts of human relationships.
That's a great way to put it. It's about raising kind, compassionate, resilient individuals who can thrive in a world that demands more than just, book smarts. And that really resonates with what this book, Einstein Never Used Flashcards, is all about.
This has been such a great conversation so far, and we've covered a lot, but I know there's so much more to this book. We'll be back with more in part 2 of this deep dive into Einstein Never Used Flashcards.
Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into Einstein Never Used Flashcards. We've been talking about how play is really learning in disguise and how important emotional intelligence is for, a child's whole development.
I'm telling you, this book has been so freeing, It's like I finally have permission to just let my kids be kids. But I am curious, we've talked about how play helps develop math and language skills. But what about literacy? I mean, I know reading aloud is important, but where does play fit in with all that?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. I mean, think about it. What are those core skills you need to be a good reader? You need to decode words, you need to understand what they mean, and you need to be able to kind of weave all those words together to make sense of a story, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And play helps build all of those skills, often without kids even realizing they're learning.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this. When kids play, they're constantly experimenting with language, right?
Yeah.
Making up stories, creating characters, basically like building whole worlds with their imaginations.
Exactly. And all of that is strengthening their vocabulary, their narrative skills, their understanding of how stories work. It's like literacy boot camp, but disguised as a tea party with stuffed animals.
So even something as simple as playing with dolls or action figures can be like a literacy booster.
Totally. A kid might create dialogue between two characters, imagine a conflict and how to resolve it. Or they might even, come up with a whole backstory for their toys. All of that is like flexing those literacy muscles in a way that feels natural and fun for them.
This is making me think about all those hours my kids spent building those elaborate Lego creations. I used to think they were just messing around, but now I realize they were like world building, creating narratives, problem solving. All those things connect back to literacy.
It's amazing, isn't it? And they were probably developing their spatial reasoning skills too, which, comes in handy later on for things like reading maps or understanding geometry.
I never thought about it like that. It's like you're sneaking veggies into a smoothie. They're getting all this good stuff without even realizing it.
So, okay, we've talked about reading aloud, but are there other things parents can do to kind of like encourage literacy through play?
Hmm.
What about writing? One really simple idea is to create like a writing center at home.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just a table with some paper, crayons, markers, maybe some stickers or stamps.
Yeah.
And then encourage your kid to, draw pictures and tell you stories about them.
I love that. It's so low pressure and easy to set up, and it lets their creativity just flow. But what if they're not actually, writing letters yet? My youngest, he's still very much in the scribbling phase.
That's totally fine. At this stage, it's more about getting them comfortable with the idea of, putting their thoughts and ideas down on paper.
Hmm.
You could also encourage them to, like, write shopping lists or birthday cards, maybe even just silly notes to family members.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be real writing yet. It's more about, planting those seeds for a love of words and storytelling.
Right, and it makes writing feel purposeful, like it's not just a school assignment. It's a way to communicate, to connect with others.
Exactly. And you can also try incorporating word games into playtime. Things like rhyming games, word searches, even just, making up silly sentences together. That can help kids develop what's called phonological awareness.
Phonological awareness, that sounds kind of technical. What exactly does that mean?
It's basically the ability to, hear and play with the sounds in words.
Yeah.
And it's super important for reading because it helps kids understand how letters and sounds work together. Think about rhyming cat, hat, bat. That's phonological awareness in action.
Ah, okay. So by playing those rhyming games, we're actually helping kids learn how to, decode words later on. It's like secret agent training for reading.
Exactly. And the best part is they're having so much fun while they're doing it.
It's really all starting to click for me now. Play, it's not just about, letting kids run wild and burn off energy. It's about building a foundation for success in every area of their lives, from academics and literacy to relationships and their own, like, well-being.
You said it. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about this book. Einstein Never Used Flashcards. Gives parents permission to relax a little, trust their kids' natural curiosity, and embrace the power of play.
Permission to relax, that's definitely something I need to hear more often. There's so much pressure to do everything right. It's easy to forget to just enjoy being a parent.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Einstein Never Used Flashcards reminds us that childhood is a time for exploration, discovery, and, maybe even a little bit of messiness along the way.
It's not about creating these like perfect little mini adults. It's about raising well-rounded individuals who are curious, resilient, and ready to, embrace the world with open hearts and open minds.
I love that. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still so much more to unpack from Einstein Never Used Flashcards.
I know, right? We'll be back with the final part of this deep dive, where we'll explore how parents can foster a lifelong love of learning in their kids. Welcome back to the deep dive. This whole exploration of Einstein Never Used Flashcards has been honestly kind of mind-blowing. It's definitely made me rethink some things about, parenting and how kids learn and all that.
It's been a good one, for sure. We've talked about so much already, like debunking those myths about how brains develop, the whole power of play thing, and why emotional intelligence is so important.
Right, right.
But there's this one more piece we need to talk about,
Okay.
and it's all about like the role parents play in helping their kids develop a real love of learning.
That's something I've thought about a lot, and I gotta say, I've struggled with it. Like,
Yeah.
you want your kids to be those curious types, the ones who are always learning, but how do you actually, like, make that happen without it feeling like a chore?
Right.
Because, let's face it, no kid actually enjoys doing homework, right?
I think the book actually offers a really interesting take on this whole thing.
Okay.
It basically says parents shouldn't try to be teachers in, that traditional sense. Instead, they should be more like facilitators
Facility.
or guides, partners in their kids' learning adventures.
I like that. So it's less about drilling facts and more about sparking that, like, natural curiosity.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do you actually do that?
Well, imagine you're a co-explorer with your child.
Oh, okay.
Like you're both curious about the world together. So, ask questions, wonder out loud, encourage their natural sense of wonder and awe.
This reminds me of something that happened with my daughter just the other day.
Oh, yeah?
So she found a spider in the garden, and she was just totally fixated on it.
Mm.
And instead of, being like, ew, spider, get away, we just kind of sat down and watched it together.
Cool.
And we talked about its web, its legs, how it catches its food. And it turned into this really amazing, like, spontaneous science lesson.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You totally tapped into her natural curiosity, right? And you showed her that learning can happen anywhere, not just in the classroom. Plus, you were modeling that love of learning yourself, which is huge.
Oh, that's a good point. It's one thing to tell kids that learning is fun, but it's another thing to actually show them.
Right. Actions speak louder than words. Right.
And it doesn't have to be some big complicated thing either.
Yep.
Like you can read a book together and talk about it, watch a documentary, go for a walk in nature, and really notice the little things. It's about making learning a part of your everyday life, not some separate thing that feels forced.
That's a great way to put it.
But what about when kids have those like really specific interests?
Uh-huh.
Like what if my son's obsessed with dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs are cool.
They are cool.
Okay.
But should I be trying to steer him towards something, I don't know, maybe more practical?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
If he loves dinosaurs, let him dive headfirst into that world. Read all the dinosaur books, visit museums, watch documentaries. Heck, maybe even encourage him to try drawing them.
Yeah.
Who knows? That passion could lead to a career in paleontology or, science writing or something.
I love that. So it's about trusting our kids to like know what they're interested in and then giving them the freedom to explore those passions. But I mean, does that mean we just let them, run wild with whatever catches their eye?
Well, it's all about balance.
Right.
Offer choices, but still provide, structure and support. Help them access resources, connect them with mentors, things like that.
This is seriously eye-opening. It makes me realize that learning doesn't always have to have some, like, specific goal or outcome.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just about that pure joy of discovery, the thrill of exploring something totally new.
And the more joy we can bring into learning, the more likely those kids are going to be, lifelong learners. When learning feels like an adventure and not a chore, it becomes something they actually want to do.
I am loving this conversation. This whole deep dive has been so helpful, so reassuring. I feel way more relaxed and confident, as a parent.
That's awesome.
It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about creating an environment where curiosity can thrive, where joy can flourish.
That's beautiful. And I bet our listeners are feeling inspired too.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We've covered a ton of great stuff from Einstein Never Used Flashcards today, but at the end of the day, I think the book's message is about empowering parents. It's like trust your gut, embrace the power of play, and raise kids who are not just smart, but kind, curious, and ready to engage with the world.
And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
It's something the book talks about.
Yeah.
And it's this. Think back on your own childhood.
Uh-huh.
What were those really powerful play experiences you had?
Yeah.
How did they shape you? And how could you create those kinds of opportunities for your kids today?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. It's like we all have that inner child, right? The one who loved to play and explore and discover. And maybe by reconnecting with that part of ourselves, we can make learning an adventure for, both us and our kids.
I think so too. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Einstein Never Used Flashcards.
And until next time, happy playing, everyone.